Hi everyone, thank you for listening to my talk titled Children's Understanding of the Objectivity of Reality. So in this talk, I would like to present an empirical study that takes theory of mind research into a new direction. As you know, theory of mind is a major topic in developmental psychology, going all the way back to Wimmer and Permer, 1983. They were the first to show that young children do not understand that other people may have false beliefs, at least not until a certain age. And just to be clear in this talk, I'm only talking about explicit false belief, not implicit measures. So another way to frame this finding is that young children do not understand the subjectivity of beliefs. It might be helpful to explain definitionally, furthermore, what we mean by the subjectivity of beliefs and the objectivity of reality. So as a general point, actually, every concept is interdefined with other concepts. Take, for instance, hot versus cold, right? Hot means not cold, cold means not hot. They're just two ends of the same conceptual continuum. So to understand either concept requires that you understand the other concept. Or take, for instance, wet versus dry. Wet means not dry, dry means not wet. And as the saying goes, sometimes we're like fish in water. We're so immersed in something that we don't even notice it anymore. So you might ask, like rhetorically, does a fish have a concept of wetness? I would argue no, because it lacks the contrastive distinction with dryness. So what's subjectivity interdefined with? According to the philosopher Donald Davidson, subjectivity is interdefined with objectivity. There are two sides of the same coin, and I elaborated on these definitions in a theoretical paper. Both subjectivity and objectivity, they both refer to this larger concept of mind independence, to the fact that what is the case objectively and what we might believe to be the case subjectively, they may or may not correspond. Reality is mind independent. So the subjectivity of beliefs refers to the fact that one's beliefs about reality may be wrong. Conversely, the objectivity of reality refers to the fact that reality is something one's beliefs may be wrong about. So based on these analytical definitions, we had an overall hypothesis for our study. Like I said, our analytical supposition is that subjectivity and objectivity are interdefined, such that understanding either requires understanding the other. But we know very well from the false belief literature that children don't quite understand subjectivity. Well, they're always making false belief errors. So this leads us to our empirical hypothesis, which is that children who do not understand subjectivity, as evidenced by their false belief errors, must also not understand objectivity. Why is this important? Basically, we just wanted to address a gap in the literature. Much research has focused on children's understanding of subjectivity, but little on their understanding of objectivity. And why is there this gap in the literature? I would say there's like this implicit assumption in the field of developmental psychology that children understand objectivity by default, even before they understand subjectivity. To take an example, you can consider Alison Gopnik's influential theory, which argues that children are like scientists in the crib who format their knowledge in a way analogous to scientific theories. But science is premised on fallibilism, the idea that any particular theory or hypothesis or belief could be wrong, right? So if you're making an analogy that children are like scientists, then you're kind of implying that children already have this fallibilist insight that beliefs could be wrong, that reality is something objective that beliefs could be wrong about. So we wanted to test this empirically. Methodologically, the question is, how would we measure objectivity understanding? So to do this, we made a novel objectivity task that conceptually mirrors the false belief task. So I will describe at a high level the false belief task and our novel objectivity task. So as in the false belief task, you're a researcher and you're telling the child a story and you ask them some questions. So in the false belief task, the researcher tells the child that a change has occurred in the objective reality. Then you ask the child whether the same change has occurred in a naive character's subjective beliefs. Of course, the answer is no. The naive character's beliefs should not match the changed objective reality, right? But sometimes children make false belief errors. They say, yes, the naive character's beliefs will match the objective reality, even though they didn't observe the change. So in our objectivity task, we just kind of flip this around. We tell the child that a change has occurred in a naive character's subjective beliefs. Then we ask the child whether the same change has occurred in the objective reality. And again, the correct answer should be no, But again, children might make these errors. And the reason they make these errors is because both tasks tap into the same understanding of mind independence. If you don't understand that reality and beliefs may diverge, then you may think they always correspond by default. You may think that whenever one changes, the other will still correspond to it. So I'd like to give you some examples of the actual stimuli that we showed to the children. So we have the story about a girl near an apple tree, and the conditions vary between subjects. So I'll show you the false belief task condition, the objectivity task condition, and also a control condition we had. So what happens in the false belief task condition? What's shown to the children is that an apple falls from the tree into an empty bucket. In other words, there's a change in the objective state of affairs. What happens in the objectivity task condition? What's shown is that an apple falls into an empty bucket, but only within a character's thought bubble. And yeah, before any of this, children had this thought bubble training to make sure they understand that thought bubbles are subjective. Yeah, so basically what happens in the objective task condition is there's a change in the subjective state of affairs. And also in the control condition, we had the same exact visual stimuli as in the objectivity task condition, but the verbal script differed. The verbal script conveys that no change has occurred in either the objective or the subjective state of affairs. And with this, we just wanted to make sure that children were attending to the verbal script, not just directly equating the visually animated thought bubble to what may have objectively or subjectively occurred. So here's the script for the false belief task version of our story. Hi, this is Sam. Sam is at the park. It's very windy today. Look at the leaves blowing in the wind. Sam is standing underneath an apple tree. She has a bucket with her. The bucket is empty. There's nothing inside. Sam is tired and wants to take a nap. Sam goes to a park bench and goes to sleep. While Sam was asleep, the wind blew an apple into the bucket. Now, memory check. So, what is in the bucket right now? An apple, says the child. Okay, Sam wakes up. Sam hasn't looked inside the bucket yet. The bucket has an apple now. So now I asked the child two questions. First, what do you think is in the bucket? An apple, of course. Second, what does Sam think is in the bucket? An apple? All right, so here's our objectivity task and control condition version of the same stimuli. So the setup is the same as before. This is Sam. Sam is at the park. It's very windy today. Look at the leaves blowing in the wind. Sam is standing underneath an apple tree. She has a bucket with her. The bucket is empty. There's nothing inside. Sam is tired and wants to take a nap. Sam goes to a park bench and goes to sleep. While Sam was asleep, nothing happened at all. Memory check. So, what is in the bucket right now? Nothing. Sam wakes up. Then Sam says to herself, "It's very windy today. I think the wind blew an apple into the bucket while I was asleep because it's very windy today." Sam says to herself, "Yes, I'm sure the bucket has an apple now." So now again, I asked the child two questions. First, what does Sam think is in the bucket? An apple, says the child, of course. Second, what do you think is in the bucket? An apple? So for our control condition, it was the exact same stimuli, but in the thought bubble phase, instead what Sam says is, Sam says to herself, "It would be funny if the wind blew an apple into the bucket, but I don't think this really happened. Yes, I'm sure the bucket has nothing inside now." Okay, so I gave you an example of our experiment, and I'll now tell you broadly the many conditions in our study. So within subjects, each child experienced 6 within subjects conditions. They had 1 false belief task condition, like I showed you, and 4 objectivity task conditions, which just varied in the reason for why the character changed their belief, like either due to a reasoning about the situation, like I just showed you, or just due to wishful thinking, like hoping and then thinking that it actually happened, or with imagining that something happened and then thinking it actually happened, or recalling a dream and then thinking the dream actually happened. We had the control condition. And we had 6 story settings, which just varied in what kinds of objects fell into what kinds of containers. Everything was fully randomized, the order of presentation of conditions, order of presentation of the story settings, the matching of the conditions to the story settings, it was all randomized. And if you're interested in replicating or collaborating, by all means, we have our OSF link here. You can also send us an email. So what were our pre-registered hypotheses? We had 3. First, that children will fail the objectivity task at non-zero rates. So this was just our way of saying that children do not understand objectivity by default, contrary to the common view. Second, that false belief in objectivity task performances will improve with age. And third, that false belief and objectivity task performances will be correlated empirically, since subjectivity and objectivity are interdefined analytically. For our participants, we had 82 American children, number based on power analysis, the 4-year-olds, 5-year-olds, and the study was conducted on Zoom via screen share. And just to be clear, our 82 children in the final analysis did not include 44 children who were excluded for failing the control condition. So we must acknowledge we had a relatively high exclusion rate. So what were our results? Concerning our first hypothesis, that children will fail the objectivity task at non-zero rates. To test this, we used binomial tests to compare children's rates of failures on the false belief task and the 4 objectivity tasks against 0.05. What we found was that this hypothesis was supported. Children's rates of failures differed significantly from 0.05 in all 5 conditions. So if the common view is that children understand objectivity by default, they should basically always pass the task, right? So we kind of falsified that assumption. Second hypothesis is that children's false belief in objectivity task performances will improve with age. To test this, we had the generalized linear mixed models with a full null model comparison and then the likelihood ratio tests. And we found that this hypothesis was also supported. The 5-year-olds performed better on the tasks than the 4-year-olds. Another finding was that children performed better in the objectivity task condition than in the false belief task condition. So I will now show you a graph. The x-axis is age, and the y-axis is the proportion of children who pass the false belief task and the objectivity task conditions. Just to be clear, we have this red line, which represents their false belief task performance over age. We have this purple line, which represents the average performance of the 4 objectivity task conditions. But as you can see, the 4 objectivity task conditions, they were very similar to each other and similarly different from the false belief task performance. Okay, so for our third hypothesis, which is that false belief in objectivity task performances will be correlated. This was also supported. There was a significant raw correlation between false belief performance and average objectivity task performance. Also, when controlling for age, the correlation was still significant. So we can discuss the contributions of our study. I guess one contribution we have is that we found that children do not understand the objectivity of reality by default, contrary to this unquestioned common view. We also found that children's subjectivity and objectivity understanding are correlated empirically, which supports the analytical supposition that the 2 kinds of understanding are interdefined. And our study may raise some questions. For instance, on the one hand, why do children make objectivity errors? They're kind of striking, right? As adults, we don't think that just because someone changes their mind that the objective reality will then change. That would be like believing in telepathy. But I guess an answer to this is it might be just generally adaptive for children to trust others. And on the other hand, why do children come to understand objectivity? Why do they stop making these kinds of errors? So we can consider responding to this question at 2 levels of analysis, evolution and ontogeny. So yeah, in terms of evolution, collaborative foraging was a key context for human evolution and human collaboration. In order to engage in collaborative foraging well, you have to make a lot of joint decisions, planning where the animals might be, planning what you're planning to do. And in collaborative decision making, in order to find the best decisions, one must understand that either oneself or others may be wrong about reality. In other words, reality is something objective one may be wrong about. So maybe it was this collaborative foraging pressure that led to the evolution of both subjectivity understanding and objectivity understanding. And in terms of ontogeny, how do children get this objectivity understanding? The speculation for the key kinds of experiential input that might drive this would be experiences of linguistic disagreement. Because if you're a child and you hear 2 people making assertions that are contradictory, it kind of forces you to realize that at least one of the assertions must be wrong. That is, reality is something that one can be wrong about. Something objective you can be wrong about. So with that, thank you very much for listening to my talk, and here's a link to download it if you want. Thank you.